France was the mother country of European revolutions. From the pivotal revolution of 1789, in which King Louis XVI lost his head in the end, to May 1968, when suddenly millions of students took to the streets. And it all started in Paris. Every year, on the 14th of July, the French national holiday, the Grande Nation commemorates its revolutionary heritage. But today, sentiment in the country has completely turned against change. And this is a problem, because Europe's second largest economy is stagnating. Despite the highest public sector share in the EU, already standing at 55% of GDP, the government budget deficit exceeds the Maastricht threshold. The response up to now has been more tax hikes, but hardly any cuts in spending. This is not really surprising for a state that is unparalleled in the EU in its unwillingness to cut back on its own expenses. The strong state, responsible for everything in France, has a tradition even longer than the revolution. The state's traditional role goes back to the age of absolutism under kings like Louis XIII and Louis XIV. But also after 1945, under governments headed by both center-right and social democratic parties, companies were nationalized or the sale of French companies to foreign buyers hindered. France engages in an industrial policy of national champions. Therefore, France was less prepared for globalization than Germany and Great Britain. This partly explains today's sluggish growth rates. Now France urgently needs reforms. One issue is the labor market. The 35-hour work week, very strict employment termination rules, lacking possibilities to employ persons for limited periods, and wage levels higher than in Germany and in Austria, keep many companies from employing more French workers. On the other hand, it would be necessary to achieve sustainable financing for the French state. The level of government debt is close to 100% of GDP. An important factor in this context is the rising cost of the welfare state. In this case as well, reforms are highly unpopular. Although there is an agreed plan to raise the statutory retirement age, French workers are still retiring at age 60 by the latest. The health system is expensive as well and does not have sufficient financing. Since the end of World War II, the global power structures have shifted. In the middle of the 20th century, France was still a colonial power and global player. After having lost this status, it continued to be the most important country in the EU for some time, initially alone, later on in tandem with Germany. Today, France is no longer able to enforce its will without encountering difficulties. The Grande Nation, as France was referred to since Napoleonic times, was yesterday. Lacking economic competitiveness and considerable levels of government debt are taking their toll.